Welcome to the Fantasy Baseball Cafe podcast. I am your host, Josh Shepardson. If you happen to be in the Twitterverse, you may also know me as at Beachhead50, where you can find me tweeting about baseball and basically anything else sports related that you can imagine. I am here to host the Fantasy Baseball Cafe podcast, and today's topic is going to be first base. We're going to look at my rankings that are posted at fantasybaseballcafe.com. And while you're there, I need to mention that the content up right now is fantastic. If you're prepping for drafts, we've got rankings for myself and RJ White, position by position, and overall rankings as well. You'll also find the team power ranking fantasy baseball previews by Brad Johnson, which are fantastic and a must read as you prep for draft season. And there's also a couple closer articles up right now. We're basically cranking out content daily, and there's a lot of great stuff that you can find on the website that will help you dominate your drafts. In addition to that, I would highly suggest checking out the forums. The forums are great. They're an active community. You're going to get answers to your questions. You're going to get to chime in on questions from other forum users. And basically, it's just a really good environment for chatting baseball. There's very excited folks on there that are as passionate about fantasy baseball as I am, as you likely are if you're visiting the website. So definitely hop on there and check that out. But without further ado, I'm going to move on to my first base rankings, which are posted on the website. And I throw a shocker right out there at the top of the rankings, and that's Jose Abreu. Abreu enjoyed a brilliant rookie season last year with the White Sox, and I have him ranked right ahead of Miguel Cabrera, who checks in second. I would say the vast majority of rankings are going to have Miguel Cabrera ahead of Abreu, and that's understandable. Miguel Cabrera has been brilliant, but last year he battled injuries and he failed to even hit 30 home runs. He still turned in an excellent season. It's hard to complain with what he did, but he ended up undergoing ankle and foot surgery. He does appear to be on track to be ready for opening day. Brad Ausmus recently said that there's a better than 50% chance that Cabrera will be ready for opening day. So I wouldn't be too terribly concerned about the injury. It's possible that the slightly later start to the spring could slow him down early, but Miguel Cabrera is a hitting machine. I like him. Abreu's rank ahead of him is more about liking Abreu a ton than it is about disliking Miguel Cabrera in any way. Abreu was excellent. He only played 145 games, though, due to missing some time with injury. Playing first base and DH should allow him to approach 160 games. It's not a demanding position. His bat's needed in that lineup. So with an extra 15 games, it's scary to think what he can do. His season was excellent. He does not strike out a great deal for a power hitter. He plays in a great home ballpark. According to Stat Corner, the home run factor for right-handed batters at U.S. Cellular Field is 119. So that's a 19% boost to home runs for right-handed batters. And Abreu certainly doesn't need a lot of help with his pop. He's got big raw power, but playing in that ballpark will help him maximize that. And I think he makes the run at 40 home runs this season, especially if he's able to check in for the 160 games that I think he will. His second half was promising. This is a guy that took the league by storm immediately, and as pitchers adjusted, so did Abreu. His power fell off a little bit in the second half. He only hit 7 of his home runs after the All-Star break, but he did post a 350 average. It's hard to complain when a guy's going to do that. And what I really find promising in those statistics is his 10.7% walk rate and 18.1% K rate after the break. So this is a guy that's made adjustments. I think he can make a run at 40 homers. I think he's going to hit around 300 because the contact rate's up. He makes big, loud contact. So the high BABIP doesn't scare me that much. I do think he's going to retain most of that. So I'm in on Abreu as my number one. Miguel Cabrera, it's scary to think that he could post another season like his AL MVP campaigns, but this is a guy that played through ankle and foot injuries last year. You have to figure that sapped some of his production. A fully healthy Miguel Cabrera is going to make a run at that top spot. And both of these guys are players that I would select within the first 6 to 7 picks in fantasy drafts. So you really can't go wrong with either. But if I'm taking one, I'm taking Abreu slightly ahead of Cabrera. Just behind them is Paul Goldschmidt. He checks in third. He's a guy that, again, should be a first-round pick just like the other two. He's another guy that could easily be selected in the first half of the first round of mixed league drafts. really big power. He strikes out a little bit more than Abreu and Cabrera, but he makes loud contact, low infield fly ball percentage, high line drive rate. So he's a guy that should hit around 300. I think he'll probably hit for a little less average than both Abreu and Cabrera because he does strike out a little bit more. But he's another guy that should hit 30-plus homers. If you are more bullish on Paul Goldschmidt's stolen base skills than I am and think that he's going to approach the 12 to 15 that he has in seasons past, then moving him ahead of Cabrera or Abreu, depending on who you have ranked second, is fine. I can see that. I just can't see him continuing to steal around a dozen bases a season. He is a corner infield player, so this isn't a guy that he does have above average athleticism for his position, but this isn't a guy that I would continue to bank on 12 to 15 stolen bases from annually. I'm thinking more like 8 to 12 this year. He did steal 9 last year in an injury abbreviated season, so a run of 10 is within reach, but I think his power comes up a little bit short. He's not in as good of a lineup as Cabrera and Abreu, so I would say his run production numbers are probably going to lag a little bit behind those guys, but he's not far behind the other two in front of him. And if you told me at season's end he ranked ahead of them, it wouldn't exactly be earth-shattering news or shocking. The guy's fantastic. He's a rock. If you're going to draft a reliable, high-floor, high-ceiling player in the first round, which is what you should be aiming for, Paul Goldschmidt fits that bill. Checking in fourth is Edwin Encarnacion. He's going to bring a little less average to the table than the other 3 hitters listed already. He makes contact at a very high rate for a power hitter, but he consistently posts low BAPIPs. And at this point in his career, it's tough to write that off as fluky. So expect something in the 265 to 275 range in batting average, maybe a little bit less, but he brings top shelf power. He's a guy that should belt 35 to 40 home runs. His stolen bases were down a little bit last year. He only stole 2, but he's a guy that could steal a half dozen. He's done it before. He's a fairly efficient base stealer. So when you add that up and you toss in the run production that he's going to get in an absolutely loaded Blue Jays offense, he's a slam dunk top 5 first baseman for me, and a guy that also has shot at going in first rounds, back end as opposed to the top half, but he is really a first round or late first round, middle to late first round, or early second round pick, and he's a great guy to build your team around. His teammate Jose Bautista checks in at 5th for me. I don't like his continued high infield fly ball rates, so I do think you're going to see some regression in batting average, probably closer to the 260 rate that he has posted in recent seasons. I don't see him hitting over 280 again. Power's comparable to Edwin Encarnacion. He's hitting in the same lineup, so you're going to get big run production from him as well. But overall, I'll take Edwin Encarnacion's package over Bautista's. It's close. You could really flip a coin on these two, but they round out your top 5. Checking in 6 is Anthony Rizzo. And Rizzo really blew up last year, and a big part of that was making gains against left-handed pitching. He struggled his first few seasons in the big leagues with southpaws. He's a left-handed hitter. They gave him some problems. There were a few experts out there looking at his numbers last year that did project a step forward in production against left-handed pitching, and they deserve a round of applause for hitting the nail on the head with that one. He really came through. He's a complete hitter that basically at this point now doesn't have a weakness. He really hits for average. He hits for power. He can walk. He's in a revamped Cubs lineup. He is just behind the top 5, but not far. He is a fantastic first baseman. And if you don't want to spend a first-round pick on the first 4 or a high second-round pick on Encarnacion or Bautista, Rizzo looks pretty good at the back end of the second round or maybe middle of the second round. It's possible he could even get drafted higher, but that's where I'm comfortable taking him. I would rather take the group in front of him, but Rizzo's new revamped Cubs roster looks pretty darn good to me. Checking in 7th is Freddie Freeman. I do anticipate in my updated rankings moving him down a little bit. The more and more I look at this Braves lineup, the harder it becomes to project good run production numbers from Freeman. What I do like about him and what will keep him in the top 10 among first basemen is his high line drive rate. Basically, since 2012, according to Fangraphs, he has the second highest line drive rate among first basemen, trailing only Joey Votto. So this is a guy that you're going to get a high average from. He makes good contact. He makes a loud contact. He's a guy that you can bank on an average north of 290, probably approaching 300. Power's a little bit short compared to the elite first baseman, but 20 to 25 homers is within reach. The biggest knock, again, is the lineup around him. The run production is probably going to be a little light for the top tier at first base, but I still see a top 10 first baseman. And if you're in a league that counts OBP, Freeman looks very good as well. He walks a lot, so he's certainly not going to drop out of the top 10 in those either. Eighth is Adrian Gonzalez of the Dodgers. He was fantastic last year. He's a part of a very good Dodgers lineup, so you expect run production. You're going to get some power. You're going to get some average. And he is what he is at this point. He's a very good first baseman. He's no longer an elite first baseman, but when you're in the top 10, you're still a very good first baseman. Victor Martinez checks in ninth. He spent most of last season DHing, but he has first base eligibility in most formats. So this is where we find him ranked. His power outburst last year is a little bit surprising given his advanced age, but his contact rate's great. Even if you regress the power some, you're still going to be talking about a guy that hits over 300 most likely. 20 to 25 homers, very good counting stats, hitting behind Miguel Cabrera, very good run scoring stats, hitting in front of JD Martinez and Yoenis Cespedes. So you've got a guy that's really going to give you everything but stolen bases. And as long as he doesn't have any setbacks with his injury, he looks like he's going to be ready for opening day like Miguel Cabrera. So I've got Victor Martinez in the top 10. 10th is David Ortiz, a designated hitter from Boston. Everybody knows Big Papi, and everybody knows that Big Papi's basically aged like fine wine. The man's been fantastic. He hits for power. His average was down a little bit last year. His BABIP was down. Part of that could be the shift. Part of that could be his advanced age. But at this point, I'm not ready to write him off. I'm not calling for a cliff season. You should get 30-plus homers. You should get over 100 runs batted in. And I do expect the batting average to trend upwards, closer to the 285 range than where he hit last year. So Ortiz rounds out the top 10. 11th, we got Buster Posey. He's best used at catcher. So I'm not going to address him too much here. Really, he belongs. If you're drafting Buster Posey, you're not drafting him to play at first base. 12th is Todd Frazier, who's also third base eligible. Frazier plays better at third base. He ranks higher at third base. He doesn't walk a lot. The average isn't going to be great, but it's not going to be terrible either. But the power is really why you're drafting Frazier. And you're also hoping that a healthy Reds lineup is going to be significantly better than it was last year. I think it will be. Frazier should hit 25 to 30 bombs with a palatable average and good counting stats. The counting stats are really the biggest question here. He needs Votto to stay healthy. He needs Bruce to rebound. But if those things happen, then he's going to put up some run production numbers. 13th is Albert Pujols, who has performed admirably. He's not the Albert of old. He's not the elite first baseman that he once was. He's not the #1 overall fantasy player that he once was. But he's still a guy that hits in a good lineup, should tally some healthy RBI totals, and he's going to give you 20-plus homers, probably in the 25 to 28 range. And hitting behind Mike Trout and some other and Cole Calhoun and some other good hitters in the Angels lineup should provide him plenty of ducks on the pond to drive in. So I like Albert. 14th is Jonathan Lucroy, who this ranking is really a product of his catcher eligibility. Again, you're not slotting him at first base. Next up is Prince Fielder, who I would actually take in front of Jonathan Lucroy if you're talking strictly first base eligibility and guys that you're going to slot there. Fielder missed last season, most of last season, as a result of having neck surgery. It's kind of scary to think what could happen with him coming back this year. We don't really know. He got off to a slow start, but he's healthy now. I would expect him to have a bounce back season, not to his peak year's production, but 25 to 30 homers, a good batting average, and plenty of counting stats. Again, he's a guy that needs some bounce backs in his lineup. He needs to bounce back himself, but if Shin-Soo Choo is getting on base in front of him, then you can expect Prince to drive in a hearty number of runs. So I like Prince Fielder this year. I'm willing to roll the dice at the right price, but he is a guy that comes with a little bit of risk. Justin Morneau ranks 16th for me. He was great at Coors Field last year, hit for a very high average, hit for a little bit of power. And I'm in on Justin Morneau. I like the ballpark. As long as he's there, I'm a fan of Justin Morneau. 17th is another breakout guy from last season, Lucas Duda. Duda really erupted for power last season, and I like him to take possibly another step forward with the dimension changes at Citi Field. The fences in center field and right center field have been moved in a bit. So for the left-handed hitting, due to that is really good news. And another run at 30-plus homers looks pretty much very likely for him. Carlos Santana checks in at 18th. He's a high on-base hitter. He's going to hit in a very favorable lineup slot. So I like Carlos Santana again. Brandon Moss moves from Oakland to Cleveland, and the ballpark change is going to be very favorable for him. As a left-handed hitter, he's going to get a sizable boost in home run park factor, going from the O.co Oakland Coliseum to Progressive Field in Cleveland. So I'm very much in on Brandon Moss. His second half numbers were dreadful. He was playing through an injured hip, and he did have surgery to correct that. He's healthy now. He should be a go for opening day. So I'm very much in on Brandon Moss. Checking in the 20th is a man that I've mentioned a couple times in today's pod, and that's Joey Votto. My biggest knock on Votto is not his skills. The skills are still there. He's a great line drive hitter. He's a very patient hitter. He gets a huge boost in OBP leagues because he walks a ton. You can go ahead and shoot him up 10 spots in OBP leagues. But the problem with Joey Votto is a knee injury that appears to be chronic, and it could really cause him problems. I'm a little bit nervous about spending a high pick on Votto based on the fact that he could miss time. I mean, even if he is healthy, the Reds would probably be wise to give him some maintenance days and not run him into the ground. So I'm bearish on Joey Votto. Others who are more bullish and not as concerned about the knee could probably move him up. I would say move him up into the Todd Frazier range, maybe move him up to 12th, make him a starter in standard leagues. But I'm not quite there yet. And I could regret this ranking at season's end, but I'm just not willing to roll the dice when you've got other capable options in front of him. 21st is Chris Carter. Carter went boom last year. The power really erupted at Minute Maid Park, and he is your typical low average, high power slugger. He's a guy that's not going to fit every team. If you are in a roto league, you are going to want to grab some high contact batting average guys to offset that low batting average. But if you're in a head-to-head league and you're willing to possibly roll the dice or punt batting average, then Chris Carter is a great target. You probably move him up a few spots in head-to-head leagues if you're going to employ that strategy. The problem with a guy like that is you could end up with the next ranked player on this list, and that's Chris Davis. You could end up with a 2014 Chris Davis season from Chris Carter if the contact issues result in a low BAPIP with the high strikeout rate. You've got some disaster possibilities, but I love the power. As I said, Chris Davis checks in at 22nd. He would rank higher if I wasn't so concerned about the shift continuing to take away hits. The shift absolutely crippled Chris Davis last year. His line drive rate remained high. He's still what he is, a high strikeout slugger, but his high line drive rates and low infield fly ball rates have helped him generate high BAPIPs in seasons past, but that just wasn't the case last year. The shift really, really hurt him. He's going to have to do something to beat that this year in order to see a sizable gain to his BAPIP. I do expect, even if he has shifted against heavily again this year, which he will be, that there will be some BAPIP bounce back, but it won't be back to his career average unless he's able to go the other way and get some other hits or force teams to stop shifting as much against him. 23rd is Brandon Belt, and Brandon Belt is a guy that could really shoot up this list by this time next year. He was off to a good start in the power department. The average was down a little bit, but he's hit for average. He hit for average in 2013. He's a guy that might be capable of putting both together, but we've got to see it over a full season. So I can't feel good about ranking him higher than this, but there is some upside with taking Belt here. 24th is Mark Trumbo. I'm down on Trumbo compared to my expert peers, and that's mostly because I worry about him getting lifted late in games. He's a first baseman playing the outfield, which means that you are going to see some defensive replacements late in games, which can cut into his at-bat total. He's a guy that is not very good against right-handed pitching. He does most of his feasting on left-handed pitching, so if teams are wise, they're not allowing him to see non-starting lefties. There's no reason for him to see a left-handed reliever unless we're talking about like Aroldis Chapman here. So there are enough red flags that I can't rank Trumbo any higher. You should get power. You should get around 30 home runs from him at Chase Field, but I do think that there's more downside than people are willing to concede. 25th is Matt Adams. He's a guy that's going to really need to improve against left-handed pitching if he wants to move forward and move up these rankings moving forward, I should say. The team did bring in Mark Reynolds this offseason, so the leash might be short for him to remain an everyday player. Thankfully, he does hit the better half of the platoon hard. He does hit right-handed pitching well. He doesn't walk a ton, so in OBP leagues, you might want to dock him a little bit. But Matt Adams, decent raw power, good contact rates. You're going to get solid power, solid batting average, and some counting stats. He's a corner infielder for me. Not a bad one. There's a little bit of upside there, but there is also some downside with the presence of Mark Reynolds. Eric Hosmer's 26. He's a guy that could be a polarizing figure in drafts. He played really well in the postseason, and he was a very well-regarded prospect coming up through the Royals farm system. So there is some upside here, but he just doesn't have top-shelf power for a first baseman. The average is good. He can steal some bases for a first baseman. And depending on where he hits in the Royals lineup, I would expect him to hit third or fourth, probably fourth behind Lorenzo Cain, I would guess. He should have some hardy RBI total, but I'm not a huge Hosmer guy. I do think that he has the skills to improve, but I'm not so sure that we're going to see a monstrous breakout this year. I do think at some point it's all going to come together for him. I'm just not ready to say that this is the year. Adam LaRoche moves from the Washington Nationals to the Chicago White Sox, and he slots in at 27th for me. US Cellular Field is going to be a boon for his power. It's a great ballpark for left-handed home run hitting. I like LaRoche in that lineup. He's going to get the hit behind Jose Abreu. That revamped White Sox lineup looks dangerous. You should get some hardy RBI total from him. The average isn't going to be great, but 25-plus homers and decent runs batted in total is going to make LaRoche a desirable corner infielder. He's a guy, though, that does struggle with left-handed pitching. So if you're in a league that allows daily roster changes, you might want to sit him against some of the tougher lefties in the league. 28th is Michael Kadire. He moves from Colorado to the Mets this year, and the move from Coors Field is probably going to hurt. In addition to his advanced age and him missing some time with injury last year, a lot of time with injury last year, there's a lot of downside with Michael Kadire, but he is a very good hitter. And at 28th, it kind of hedges both ways. Most likely, he's not going to rank 28th. He's either going to rank significantly lower because he misses time, or he really struggles with his new environment, or he ranks higher because the changes to Citi Field help him and he stays healthy for a full season. But 28th is kind of the middle range for that. I think that's a good place to take him and mitigate some of the risk, but also build in a little bit of potential positive return on your investment. 29th is Steve Pearce. This is a guy that really emerged at an old age last season for the Orioles. He was a late bloomer. Love the ballpark. I think he'll hit over 20 home runs again this year, but increased exposure to right-handed pitching is probably going to bring his batting average down. I do like the Orioles lineup. I do like Steve Pearce this year. So 29th makes him look pretty good as a corner infielder. He can play some outfield for you. His multi-position eligibility is a nice addition. Chase Headley's better to discuss with third baseman. You're not drafting him to play first base. Mike Napoli ranks 31st, though, and he's in a good Boston lineup. And finding out that he has some problems with sleep apnea might lead some to believe that there's some upside here. I mean, just think about functioning on less than ideal sleep. And Mike Napoli did a pretty darn good job as a professional baseball player. So maybe there's a little bit of upside here, but I just can't see ranking him in front of the other guys. Adam Lynn moves from Toronto to Milwaukee. He's going to be playing the field more with the Brewers. But he's another guy that you don't want to use against left-handed pitching. He really belongs in a platoon. Good ballpark for power. Lynn isn't a top-shelf power hitter, but Milwaukee's ballpark is going to maximize what power he does have, and he does make good contact. So you should expect a high average, 285 or so, maybe a little higher. Kenny Vargas is 33rd. He is going to have to make some adjustments if he hopes to perform as well as he did last year. High BABIP really inflated his numbers, but he's a guy that made the leap from AA to the majors and did so pretty darn well. So I like Kenny Vargas as a potential upside play, but there is some downside if he does struggle with the league having the book out on him, so to speak. Billy Butler's 34th. He goes from Kansas City to Oakland. Oakland's basically going to use him as their designated hitter. He might occasionally see time at first base, but this is a guy that really struggled last year, and he's got old man skill, so it's not a given that you're going to get a bounce back from him. He's a guy that does punish left-handed pitching, so if you're a daily gamer, you're going to want to make sure that you have him rostered when he faces a southpaw. He's going to have to pick it up against right-handed pitching if he wants to be more than a utility player for fantasy gamers this year. Joe Mauer's 35th. Really, his star loses a lot of shine, no longer catcher eligible. But if you're in a non-base league, Joe Mauer looks a little bit better. Good walk rate. You're going to get a high average. He's a good guy to pair with a low batting average player like Chris Carter. And if you believe in the Twins lineup, which I think it's fairly good, it should be slightly above average, then you can pencil in Joe Mauer for some good run totals and RBI totals. The problem is he's just not going to give you that power that you're usually looking for from the position. Brian McCann checks in 36th, but we've discussed him with the catchers, and that's where you're going to slot him. Mark Teixeira, his teammate's 37th. He's another guy that was beaten down by the shift. The power will play at Yankee Stadium. The switch hitting Teixeira should hit 20-plus bombs, but his heyday in batting average is a thing of the past. So you're drafting Teixeira for power, but don't expect a big average. Speaking of big power but a lack of batting average, Pedro Alvarez is 38th. He's making the move across the diamond full-time this year. He's better used at third base, where he should also be eligible in most leagues this year. But he's going to form a platoon over at first base with Corey Hart, where Pedro Alvarez will face right-handed pitchers and Corey Hart will face most southpaws. Alvarez has big power, but as we saw last year, the strikeout rate can really cripple his fantasy value. If you're willing to roll the dice, or you have some players that can offset that average, he'll play fine in roto leagues. He's probably slightly better in head-to-head leagues where the variance of batting average from week to week makes it a really tough category to target anyways. And you might have a couple hot weeks from Alvarez where you can pick that up. But his power plays, that's why you're drafting Alvarez. Kendrys Morales is 39th. He's in Kansas City this year. He missed about half. He wasn't signed until June last year because he turned down a qualifying offer, and teams just weren't willing to forfeit a first-round pick in the amateur draft to sign Morales. It's tough to fault clubs for that. Unfortunately, Morales struggled all year. I would blame a lot of that on the fact that he was just thrown into the fire when he was signed. He really didn't have a spring training to get ready. So he's facing big league pitching that's in the middle of the season and up to full speed, and Kendrys Morales just was overmatched. A bounce back is in the cards, but not back to his peak years with the Angels. He's a guy that might play well as a utility player. Depending on where he hits in the Royals lineup, you could get some good RBI totals, but he's not a great base runner. So even if he is on base quite a bit, he's probably going to score less runs than your typical high on base guy. But Morales is an okay utility option. Lonnie Chisenhall is 40th. He's better ranked with the third baseman, but he enjoyed a breakout last year. He hit left-handed pitching a little bit better, which helped. He hits right-handed pitching fairly well. He'll give you a decent average. He'll give you middling power, and he's probably going to hit down order for the Indians, so the run production upside's limited. But Chisenhall's not the worst option, better slotted at third base. C.J. Cron is 41st. He's going to get the bulk of his playing time as a designated hitter with Pujols playing first base. Cron has big raw power, but it hasn't always translated to in-game power production. He's a guy that hits left-handed pitching harder than right-handed pitching. So again, if you're a daily gamer, Cron's a guy that you're going to want to keep tabs on when he faces a lefty. In season-long leagues, the fact that he isn't as good against right-handed pitching is a bit of a bummer because it is going to drag down his production. But Cron's not a bad dice roll late. He's a guy that does have some upside to outperform some of the guys in front of him. Ryan Howard's 42nd. And when you've got your own general manager saying the club would be better without you, and that's basically what Ruben Amaro Jr. did, the writing's on the wall. Howard just isn't what he was. He is still in a good ballpark for hitting home runs. And if he is able to tap back into that power, you can live with the low average. But at this point in his career, it's tough to envision Howard really making owners pay for passing on him in drafts. If you're in need of power in the late game of the draft, you can take Ryan Howard. Just know that there's a batting average risk, and we're not talking about the man that was just an RBI and home run machine at his peak. James Loney's 43rd. Loney has middling power for a first baseman, and you're basically, if you're drafting James Loney, you're looking to prop up the batting average of someone else on your roster. He might give you some runs batted in as long as he hits behind Evan Longoria and the better hitters in the Rays lineup. But this isn't a guy to get excited about. He's a utility option, basically only, maybe an emergency corner infielder. Mike Morris is 44th. He moves from one pitcher's park to another, going from the Giants to signing with the Marlins. The power is going to be tough to come by there, and that's the biggest knock against Morris. He also is a guy that hasn't always stayed healthy, so there is some health risk here. Batting average isn't likely to be terrible. It's also not likely to be great. He should have hit behind Giancarlo Stanton, so with a high on-base guy like that in front of him, Morris does have some RBI potential, but he's not a guy that you want to trot out as your first baseman. And 45th is Jonathan Singleton. Singleton is a real wild card. He could fare very well, hit down order, provide power and decent average at Minute Maid with the Astros, or he could struggle and strike out at a high rate again and get optioned to AAA. I mean, there is a high risk, high reward element to Singleton, which makes him a great end game target, but I would not target him any higher. The leash isn't likely to be super long this year. They certainly can allow him more time in the minors if he needs it to refine his game. And the fact that the club has Evan Gattis and Chris Carter as options to DH and play first base, with Gattis moving out from left field to likely DH in the event that Singleton struggles, does shorten that leash a little bit for Singleton. So he's a guy that if you want somebody to roll the dice on at first base, he's a good option, but just recognize that it's possible you could also be cutting him very early in the season. Looking at my ranks compared to the FantasyPros expert consensus rankings reveals that Justin Morneau, who I have ranked 16th, is 10 spots higher than the expert consensus rank. And I get it. Morneau didn't fare very well in his last few years in Minnesota. He battled concussions, and he was dreadful when he was dealt to the Pirates midseason in 2013. So I understand the trepidation with him, but Coors Field was just what the doctor ordered for him. His strikeout rate was a minuscule 10.9% last year, and that really helped fuel his .319 batting average. He did hit the ball on the ground 44% of the time on his batted balls in play, according to Fangraphs. It's his highest mark since 2007. So I do think that there's some potential for a few more fly balls from him this year, which would be good news for his Tater total. You add a healthy Carlos Gonzalez and Troy Tulowitzki to that lineup, and it suddenly becomes a run-scoring juggernaut. So wherever Justin Morneau hits in that order, which could be anywhere from third through sixth, I would say, I would imagine that it's probably closer to fifth or sixth for them, since Cargo and Tulo should probably be hitting third and fourth, but who knows with Walt Weiss. But Justin Morneau will probably be spelled against left-handed pitching this year, with Willian Rosario no longer the everyday catcher. He's backing up at first base, backing up at catcher. That hurts Morneau just a little bit, but if Rosario's glove proves to be terrible at first base, Morneau may get the occasional start against left-handed pitching, and I do think that there is some upside. He did hit left-handed pitching when he was at his best and winning the 2007 American League, winning the American League MVP back in the 2000s. So I would say that there is some upside here with Morneau hitting left-handed pitching, even though Willian Rosario is lurking. But what he did against right-handed pitching, his ballpark, his lineup, there's a lot to like here. He's just outside the top starting first baseman, or I should say starting first baseman in standard leagues. And he's a really strong corner infield option. Ranked lower than my expert peers at FantasyPros is Albert Pujols. There's no other way to say it. He lacks the pop he once had. He still is capable of hitting 25-ish homers, but I don't see him hitting 30 again this year. His ISO has been down the last 2 seasons. It's been under 200 both years. And he hasn't had the batting average over 280 since 2012. So he's a good player. He's going to get a boost thanks to hitting in a lineup that should score runs. So his runs batted in total will help prop him up a bit, but I just think that a top 10 ranking is too aggressive for my liking. So while I like Albert Pujols, I don't love him. He's just on the outside looking in. And that wraps it up for the first base rankings. Thank you for joining me on today's podcast. Again, check out the great work at fantasybaseballcafe.com. Hop on the forums, have some fun. It's almost baseball season, so let's get ready for these drafts and beat up on the competition. Good luck, everybody.